Okay. Now to figure out how to get this up on Facebook. I did this yesterday. You would think I would remember. Okay. Here we go. Oh, how am I going? Shh, that was obnoxious. All right. Hold on, folks. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to put this up to Facebook. Okay. Chat with me on YouTube. All right. Thank you for your patience. Wish there was an easier, better way to do this than to make you all wait as I awkwardly figure through the logistics. But for a one-man show, this appears to be the way that it has to work. So, hi, Heldora. And Rosin's back. I'm just sitting here doing my embroidery. Ooh, send me pictures on Facebook. So, today was not what I thought it was going to be. And if I'm being honest, that's kind of like every day of my life. Hang on a second. Every day of my life has been a surprise, and usually not what I expected it to be. But today in particular, I actually had to get home and talk to Walter, and say, okay, like, here's what I'm thinking. I have some decisions to make. Or I could just keep on keeping on trucking. But I'll get to that in a second. So then the good thing is we're on day, I know I had to count. We're on day 17 of the trip total. I didn't really count the Sunday that I was traveling. That just didn't seem like that was just getting to the trip. The trip really started on Monday the 31st. So 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not good at counting this. Anyways, it's a day 8 of research at the RISD Museum. And today I started out by finishing up one of the textiles that I had left off on yesterday. Just had a couple of measurements and some photographs that I wanted to take. And then I wanted to turn to some of the tapa cloths and the bark cloths. They had some from Samoa, Fiji, the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii. I think those are the named places, and then other places like generic have been attributed to generically Polynesian because there's just not enough information about it. So I was looking at one of the bark cloths. Wow, excuse me. That was obnoxious. Sorry. So I was looking at one of the bark cloths, and one of the people who is, I don't know what her official title is. She is essentially the indigenous people's curator. I'll have to look it up. Maybe a fellow at the museum. So I had met her, and she had been in and out several times in this study center that I'm at throughout the past week and a half. And she knew that I was going to be looking at tapa cloths, and she was very excited. And I think I mentioned this in a past video, but she just happened to walk in to ask the assistant curator that I've been working with a question, and she was like, "Ooh, what are you working on?" So we started looking at it, and I showed her some of the stuff under the microscope, and she was fascinated to see it, and she was making jokes about like how weird it looks under the microscope, because it does kind of look very weird and otherworldly. And so And she was like, "Well, how does like how does this work?" And so I was showing her, and I let her kind of maneuver the microscope around and focus. And as we were doing that, somebody else who was another curator in a different department happened to stop by and said, like, "Hey, what are you doing?" So then we kind of just had it, like the four of us had this big group conversation. And so I was saying, it's very interesting on this particular cloth that I was looking at that was attributed to Samoa, that I had looked at a rubbing board from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County that had this exact same motif on it. So it was much bigger because the one I looked at was like you could put it in your lap, like bigger than a laptop kind of thing. And the motifs on this particular cloth were like maybe this big, right? So not the same size, but it was very cool because both were attributed to Samoa, and that's just, sort of the consistency of the motif from being from that area. So we were looking at that and kind of, I don't want to say putzing around because we're talking shop, right? We're doing things, and then I said, well, let me show you because I have a 3D scan of the rubbing boards. And like, you have what? So I said, yeah. And I pulled up the 3D scan and I was moving it around and showing them from the side view and the front view and zooming in and explaining to them how it was made. And of course, they were all just fascinated. So it's always kind of cool when you can make a curator say, "Oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen." So that was like the first half of the day, and then I went to lunch, and then I came back and um, I looked at one more tapa cloth or bark cloth, and I was like, you know what, I need to change up my day. So let's look at something pre-Columbian because that was on the shelf. Oh, things I need to get through still. So to bring you up to speed, last week I did 38 out of 65 textiles, which left me 27 for this week. I knew I was only going to do probably 2 on Monday, which is what I did. And then I did 5 on Tuesday yesterday. And then I only did 3 today, which we'll talk about why in a moment. So really, I've only gotten through 10 out of the 27 textiles for this week, which leaves me 17 textiles, which makes me a little bit nervous. So I had to start making some decisions, and there's a very, very good reason why. But the 17 leaves me 3 more tapa cloths, which I haven't looked at, 2 more pre-Columbian outside of the one that I just started looking at today, 2 Japanese plus a Japanese stencil that I just kind of wanted to see. It was a Katagami stencil from the 18th or 19th century, so I just wanted to see it. 2 stamped or crushed velvets, both of them dated to Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries. One 20th century medieval reproduction that is very similar to a Ferrer, but it was actually made by somebody who was trying to imitate Ferrer. So I just thought it'd be kind of cool to see, but I can cross that off my list. And then there's like 5 or 6 odds and ends, and then one Balinese textile that is repeatedly dyed in indigo and then gilded. So that one is like probably the one that I might be like, okay, outside of what I think I need to do and pivot and doing, I might want to see that one. So I'm kind of talking in circles because I am not telling the story in a linear way. I always kind of playfully yell at my kids for doing that. Like, don't start at the beginning and end with the end, or don't start at the end and then go to the beginning. So Bonnie Alessia says, "Hi, loving this adventure. Happy to catch you live." Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. So let me get to why I am all discombobulated and going, okay, it's time for plan B. So I get to my third textile. It's just after lunch. And it was actually right after the assistant curator, who's the person I've been primarily working with, had to go to some meetings. So the head curator for costumes and textiles was in the room with me. And so this particular pre-Columbian textile is like a hanging or massive banner. Like it's huge. We probably, if we could have captured having this the particular room we had on Monday, which was for bigger textiles, we probably should have done it in there, but we're doing our best to kind of like unroll on the fairly large table we have and then like, do it section by section. So we unroll this thing and it is what we believe to be is like, the top of the fabric or the motif of the fabric is up. And so we're looking at the motif and, as soon as you unroll something, there's always like at least a few seconds to a couple of minutes where you just kind of like pause and you take it all in, and your eyes are just kind of scanning things for irregularities, for similarities, for cool things that didn't fade or somehow got stuck in the textile or that happened to the textile. Like this one, right up and down the middle of it, there's a lot of fading, but not as much in the middle. So we're like, wonder what happened. Maybe they folded it in half, and that half fold was what was out towards the sun. Like, so we're having this discussion. We're kind of looking at it. It was very funny because at the exact same time, the head curator and I, on two different ends of the table, both like not even paying attention to what the other person was doing, took the corner and we lifted it up. And I laughed and I said, well, great minds think alike, right? Because you always want to see like what's underneath the textile, what's behind it, what does it look like? You can find out more. How much of the pigment sank through when you're doing Indian textiles? It's a great way to find out if something has been mordant dyed or resist dyed, because the dye will at least be on both sides, at least some of it, or versus painted or block printed, where there might be a little bit of seepage, but doesn't go all the way through. So both of us flipped the bottom, and both of us at the exact same time said, "What?" And then we both like flipped more of it because we just were like kind of peeking at the corner, and then we both like as much as we could folded. We're like, what is happening here? So on the back side of this pre-Columbian textile, which is actually two full cloths that are joined together at the selvage, okay, and so it's very, very wide. Somebody on the opposite side, don't know when, don't know how long ago, I guess it's the same thing. Don't know who and don't know when or how long ago. Had, we'll say, sketched, for lack of a better word, because they did use some kind of pigment, so maybe inked is a better word. Well, we'll just say sketched to convey the meaning of it. They had sketched roughly a motif that they wanted to put on it. Okay. So it was like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, did they do that first, decide they didn't like it, and then just use the reverse side of the fabric to ultimately do what they did? Or did they intend it at some point to be a double-sided reversible thing? Or maybe they didn't like or didn't have use for anymore the motif that we were seeing and that I thought was really what I was going to be studying. And just decided, okay, we're just gonna, like, much with a painter's canvas, we're just gonna repaint the canvas and paint something new. So it wasn't really clear. But we're looking at this because there's definite motifs that align with pre-Columbian Peruvian, and I believe that one is 12th. I don't know what the time period. I think it's Shankai, yeah, 12th to 14th or 15th centuries. So there are some things that are consistent with motifs, and there's a couple things that like look a little odd, but when they're sketching, you're not sure what ultimately it was supposed to be, right? So we both like pick up a corner, go, what? And then like draw it back more. And we're looking at each other, and I'm like, this is stamped here, here, and here. And she's like, you think so? And I'm like, I don't know, before I throw it in the Photoshop to see if, like, when I transpose them over each other, if they are close to identical. Sometimes you look for little markers like a mistake in the carving, or a very wonky way in which something was carved, that if it is repeated, you're like, okay, I call those markers, right? So I said, without like throwing it in the Photoshop and confirming, yes, like my immediate instinct as a block printer, looking at that and just the eye and the consistency and the symmetry, and also the way things block print is always different than the way things paint. So I was like, those look like block printed, right? And again, we're only looking at a small fraction of the bottom at this point because that's not what we had intended. So and so we start talking like, why would somebody do this? And I said, well, here's what I will tell you. If this is in fact sketched or begun to be made during the Shankai period, and if this is in fact printed, this is the first and only one I know of. Now, there's a lot that can happen between point A and point B, right? It could have been somebody 2 years ago, not really, but it could have been, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, somebody drew it. Right now, there is no way for me to tell when that drawing was made. Well, frankly, there's no way to tell either way when they were made. So that is the first thing that's like, okay, we don't know when that happened. The second thing is we immediately looked to the provenance. And so when we were researching the provenance, it came from an art dealer who, for a long time, he and his father were fairly well renowned. But then eventually they got charged with some kind of, I don't want to misspeak, some kind of arrangement in which it was accused or alleged that they were telling the buyers they had originally purchased the items for more than they had actually purchased it for. Now I was like, don't all art dealers do that? Like, don't all people, like, I'm not gonna tell you how much I paid for it. I want to make as much as possible. But I don't know if these were like, I'll pay you a 25% finder's fee, go find me a Peruvian textile or whatever. So I don't know all the details, but some accusations have been made or were made 10, 20 years ago that questioned their integrity. And so it apparently impacted millions of dollars in pre-Columbian art and textiles. So I don't know if that like already like suddenly indicts like, oh, now there's no credibility for this thing because it came from these people. However, those people are still in business, still doing art dealing and arts consulting. They had their day in the press where they said, we refute all these things. So like innocent until proven guilty. I don't have all the details yet, but of course this is in the back of my mind. Okay, like this would be the first and only, but it also came from some people who maybe were a little sus, and also the motif, like there's some things that are maybe off, but again, you don't know exactly. Like there are these circles. Well, the Shankai did not use a lot of circles unless they were like plangy or resist dyed circles, which usually had like a dot in the middle. That's what I was thinking. But then as I was thinking some more, I'm like, actually, there were a decent number of circles in this and that and this, and I'm like starting to think of these examples. So here's what's happening with my mind, and here is what I think plan B is going to be tomorrow, but I'm actually going to discuss it with the curator tomorrow when I get in. If this is the only textile I have ever come across, and the only textile that I know of from my research, there could be others, but don't think there are, because this is like the big debate in the pre-Columbian textile painting versus printing community, right? Every textile I've ever seen that was pre-Columbian from 4 to 600 BCE through 1500 CE has been hand painted. There has never been a single indicator of a stamp. If I just found a textile that has a stamp on it and it is potentially from a time period where we can't otherwise prove it, I would be daft to just be like, okay, cool, take a couple of pictures and then move on to the other 17 textiles that I need to get through. That is my opinion. I could be wrong. So like when I was talking to Walter Lothar, I was like, I feel like I need to spend the last 2 days on that textile. And then the other textile that I was telling you guys about that I can't give you too much information on yet because there's more testing that's happening. To take some more pictures where I can try and line up. That's the one that has all the holes that I think either there was some beadworks, maybe embroidery. That's what the original listing was, or maybe some spangles. So I want to take some better pictures and better lighting circumstances, which might need us to like shift around where we're doing this. So I'm like, I think what I need to do is just say, this is a perfect excuse to come back to RISD Museum to see these other 17 textiles. The next 2 days I'm going to spend on primarily this pre-Columbian textile, taking every possible picture, measurement, looking throughout the whole thing with a microscope, seeing if there's And if I end up proving this is more modern or this is just a counterfeit, um, that's okay, right? It's okay. It's disappointing. I would love, here's my bias that I have to be careful about. I would love to be like, yes, of course. They use stamps and estampaderos and celos and whatever to print on their textiles. I would love to be able to say that, but I can't say it right now. I have not seen a single example of a stamped textile. So I'm like, I would be out of my mind to not pivot my plans and go, no, actually, at least most of tomorrow, I am going to focus on this pre-Columbian one. And it is massive. We did finally flip the whole thing over and unrolled the length of the table, which I would estimate is maybe a third of the textile. There's so much more that we could possibly see. So I feel like I have to. I have to pivot my plans and I don't know. You guys tell me what you think. Am I crazy? Should I just keep looking at my 17 other textiles? Or should I go, no, like there's a possibility here this is the first and only of its kind. So I'm definitely leaning towards the latter. Like this is possibly like a true discovery. It can also be a fake. So I'm trying not to get too excited. I'm certainly like, nobody go out there and quote me like, oh, Tanya found this only. Like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. I am just confiding in you in my vlog that I found something very interesting. And I feel like I gotta switch. So I'm going to talk to the curator when I get in tomorrow and say, here's what I'm thinking. You know, you guys have been wonderful. I believe I have an open invitation to come back. It'll be a great excuse to come see you guys again. And I may say like, let me see the Javanese indigo gilded one. Like that one has to be on my list. But of the things that I have to look at, I have the 3 Topicloths, which I have a decent number of Topicloths already. 2 pre-Columbian. I've got a ton of that for my studies overall. 2 Japanese, but both of them are much more modern than I usually do. But since I was here, I thought I would do them. The only 2 that I'm kind of bummed about are the 2 stamped velvets and then the Balinese. And then the other odds and ends are ones that I'm like not even 100% sure are printed or painted. They were just things that popped up in my search, some kind of keyword triggered. And so we have to see. So I'm looking, Rosin says, I say check this one out now. You will be thinking about it the whole time. I agree. And Bonnie says, what's going to keep you up at night if you don't do it? Look at the big textile. The rest of them will be there later. Yeah. So, well, and I also had to basically think about and consider the scope of the research to which I have responsibility to the funder and towards those who were like, okay, we'll participate in your research because this is what we think you're doing. So, but I feel like, no, actually, this still very much falls within the scope because if there is a possibility that I have discovered something that I couldn't otherwise document, then I have to take the time to document it. So that's like that's my plan B. It's my pivot. It's time to try to change things around. Didn't expect that to happen, but you know what else is new? Most of my life and my travels and this trip has been insane in mostly the good way. So I left it upside down with the interesting stuff right side up from the bottom. And tomorrow I'm gonna go in and say, here's what I'm thinking. Gonna pivot. You know, are there any other pieces in the collection that you think, oh my gosh, you just have to see before you leave this time around? Or do you think the rest are like, yeah, you can wait, come back, do some more research. We'd love to see you in a couple months, couple years, whatever. So, yeah, I actually left like 5 or 10 minutes early, which, you know, normally I try to like milk every bit of time, but I was so overwhelmed with the possibility of what it could be. I felt I needed to like stop and step back and check all of my emotions and biases and expectations. And like, there's a good possibility that this is going to be nothing. but it will make for an interesting story. It will certainly make for an interesting article, right? Or blog or something written. So yeah, so that's what I think I'm going to be doing. Otherwise, tomorrow I will finish up the 3 Top of cloths. Um, the other 2 pre-Columbians are huge. They're really, really, really big. I can't believe how big some of these are. Like it's just like that Indian textile. When I was telling the head curator today, we were talking about the Reynolds coverlet that I got to see on Monday, and I was like, that thing doesn't have any seams in it, right? She was like, "You're right." Like, because sometimes you're looking at these things, and we just have like these. Well, yeah, okay, it's 3 yards wide. We can get a quilter's cotton for 3 years, but then like we're not thinking, well, this was made in the 9th century, or this was made in the 16th or 17th century. Like, where was that made? So, all right, that was my exciting, interesting vlog from day 17 of the trip, day 8 of RISD Museum research. On that note, I know this was short and sweet, but I'm not going to be talking for an hour every single night, and I really need to bring my tripod back home tomorrow, so that I can actually film some stuff, and maybe I'll have more interesting, exciting information to share, or maybe I'll be like, yeah, I did a bunch of research. Those guys totally faked that. I don't know, or I may not know for years. Lothar had a very interesting suggestion. He said, "What if you could get it radiocarbon dated?" And I said, "Well, okay, the textile is gonna come up the same for both, obviously, right?" But he's like, "Can you like radiocarbon date the pigments?" And I don't know that there is enough residual pig because it's like very lightly sketched. That's the problem. Usually with any of these paintings, it's really easy to be like, there's a big glob of the pigment or the paint or enough that we can scrape away or pluck a few fibers. And I don't know how much you need for radiocarbon dating. And I'm not entirely sure that the museum was even interested or willing. So, I mean, it was a good question for Lothar Walter to ask. But I was like, I don't know if that would work, but it would be fascinating to know when one was drawn and done versus when the other one was drawn and done. So, okay, that's it. I will see you guys. I may or may not check in tomorrow, Thursday. For sure, I will check in by Friday evening to do a recap of the entire RISD trip. And then I will not be checking with you guys until the following Tuesday. So, thank you all for watching and tuning in, of course, as always. And I guess wish me luck. I don't know what I'm facing tomorrow. That's exciting. All right. Bye.